The coffee mug hit the wooden porch and exploded like a gunshot. It was 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 2024, frost still glittering on the windows of the small ranch house on County Road 14, when Robert Eugene Davis opened his door and saw 4 men in tactical vests standing in the pale dawn light. For exactly 3 seconds, his face held the same easy smile he'd worn coaching track at Hartwell High for 37 years. The smile that fooled everyone. Then Detective Jennifer Santos held up her badge, and the words came out cold and final. "Robert Davis, you're under arrest for the murder of Michelle Ann Parker." The mug slipped. Coffee spread across the frost like old blood, steam rising in the freezing air. Davis's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His hands, the same hands that had helped hundreds of students improve their times, that had organized scholarship funds and led prayer groups, began trembling uncontrollably. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound that seemed to echo across 45 years. Across the street, Nancy Kowalski was letting her terrier out when she saw the tactical vehicles. Within seconds, she was on the phone. Within 5 minutes, County Road 14 was lined with neighbors, in bathrobes and winter coats, breath clouding in the March cold, staring at Coach Davis being led in handcuffs toward a patrol car. By 7:15 a.m., Hartwell's population of 3,200 was waking to news that would shatter everything they believed about trust, safety, and the man who'd coach their children. "That's Coach Davis," someone said, voice cracking with disbelief. "That can't be right," another neighbor insisted. "He organized Michelle's scholarship fund. He spoke at her memorial every year." But it was right. And that was exactly what made it so horrifying. To understand how Robert Eugene Davis lived free for 45 years, while Michelle Parker's family waited for justice, you have to go back to an August evening in 1979, when Hartwell, Nebraska, was a place where front doors stayed unlocked, and evil was something that happened somewhere else. Michelle Ann Parker was 16 years old the night she vanished. Auburn hair in a French braid, freckles across her nose, a laugh that carried across hallways. She was president of the Future Farmers of America chapter, volunteer at the county animal shelter every Saturday, dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She'd won second place at the Holt County Fair that afternoon, with her prize heifer Daisy, the red ribbon still pinned to her denim jacket when she told her best friend Jennifer Walsh she'd stay another half hour to watch the tractor pull finals. "You sure you'll be okay?" Jennifer had asked, uneasy about leaving Michelle alone at the fairgrounds. Michelle had laughed. "It's Hartwell. I've known everyone here my entire life." That was 9:30 p.m. on August 18th, 1979. By 9:58 p.m., the tractor pull was over. Witnesses remembered seeing Michelle near the livestock barns around 10:10, talking to someone by the 4-H animal pens. The fairgrounds were emptying, families heading home through the humid Nebraska night with sleeping children and armloads of stuffed animals. Michelle's truck was found the next morning in the far corner of the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat with $23 in cash, and her driver's license untouched. The red ribbon from Daisy's competition fluttered from the sun visor. Thomas Parker found it at 7:45 a.m. after Michelle never came home. The search began within hours. 200 volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through cornfields and pastures, calling Michelle's name until voices went hoarse. Robert Davis, then 23 years old and a first-year assistant track coach, joined the search on Sunday afternoon. Everyone in Hartwell knew him, trusted him, liked his easy smile and the way he stayed late to help students. He was there at 4:37 p.m. when they found Michelle's jacket caught on barbed wire half a mile from the fairgrounds, torn along the left sleeve, dark stains on the fabric that would later test positive for blood. Type O positive, Michelle's blood type. What Sheriff Raymond Hayes didn't notice, what no one would discover until DNA technology finally caught up with evil 45 years later, were the microscopic skin cells on the jacket's collar. Cells containing DNA that would eventually destroy Robert Davis's carefully constructed lie. The jacket discovery intensified the search to desperation. If Michelle had been walking home and someone attacked her, her body might be nearby. Bloodhounds picked up her scent but lost it at the edge of a dirt-access road. Tire tracks in the dust suggested a vehicle had been parked there, but the ground was too dry for clear impressions. By Monday morning, 500 volunteers were searching. The Nebraska State Police took over. The FBI sent an agent from Omaha. Everyone in Hartwell had a theory, but the most persistent whispers focused on strangers at the fair, carnival workers who'd vanished after closing night, drifters who worked the rides and disappeared into the Nebraska darkness. The truth was closer than anyone imagined. It was searching alongside them, organizing scholarship funds, speaking at memorial services. On October 12, 1979, 2 hunters found human remains in woods near the Elkhorn River, 18 miles from where Michelle's jacket had been discovered. Dental records confirmed what the Parker family already knew in their hearts. It was Michelle. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. A single powerful blow from behind. Buried in a shallow ravine, covered with branches and dirt in a panicked rush. Among the evidence collected was a strand of brown hair on Michelle's jeans. In 1979, forensic science could determine it came from a Caucasian male with type A positive blood, a description matching 34% of the male population. Without DNA analysis, the hair was photographed, logged, and stored in the evidence room, where it would wait for technology that didn't yet exist. The investigation consumed 6 months of intensive work, 300 interviews, polygraph tests, background checks. Every lead dissolved into frustration. By summer 1980, the case stalled completely. Sheriff Hayes retired the following year, haunted by the unsolved murder. The evidence was sealed in boxes and moved to the basement of the Holt County Courthouse, where it would sit untouched for over 40 years. For Thomas and Carol Parker, Michelle's death became a decades-long vigil that would define the rest of their lives. Carol never recovered. She kept Michelle's bedroom exactly as it had been, washing the sheets weekly, dusting the FFA trophies. Every year, on August 18th, they held a memorial at Michelle's grave. In the early years, dozens attended. By the 1990s, it was often just Carol, Thomas, and a handful of classmates who still remembered. Carol wrote letters to the sheriff's department, to the state police, to the governor, begging someone to reopen Michelle's case. Most went unanswered. She kept a scrapbook of newspaper articles, adding clippings whenever similar cases were solved elsewhere, drawing connections only she could see. Her hope never died. It burned with a mother's fury that refused to accept that her daughter's killer would go free. Meanwhile, Robert Davis built a life on the foundation of murder. He married in 1983, had 2 sons, became head track coach in 1987, building Hartwell High's program into a regional powerhouse. named Nebraska High School Coach of the Year in 1995. He served as an usher at the Methodist Church, the same church where Michelle's funeral had been held. He organized the annual scholarship fund in Michelle's name, personally calling donors, hosting fundraising events that sent 40 students to college over 3 decades. At the 25th anniversary memorial in 2004, Davis spoke about never forgetting Michelle, about keeping her memory alive. Carol Parker thanked him afterward, tears streaming, telling him Michelle would be grateful for his dedication. Davis hugged her. If he felt anything beyond the performance he'd perfected over 25 years, his face never showed it. But behind the facade lived the truth. He'd killed Michelle Parker in a moment of rage he'd spent 45 years rationalizing. She'd rejected his advances near the livestock barns that August night, threatened to report him for inappropriate behavior. In panic born of fear and fury, he'd offered to drive her home, pulled off onto that dirt road, and silenced her forever with a tire iron from his truck. He'd buried her in those woods, driven back to Hartwell, and lived as if nothing had changed. Over the years, he convinced himself he'd gotten away with it, that the evidence was too old, too degraded, too contaminated to ever identify him. But science doesn't forget, even when people do. The breakthrough came not in Nebraska, but in a Virginia laboratory, where advances in forensic DNA technology made the impossible possible. In 2019, Holt County elected Jennifer Santos as sheriff. She'd grown up in Hartwell, remembered Michelle Parker's case from childhood, had studied criminal justice at University of Nebraska, worked as a detective in Omaha. One of her campaign promises: review cold cases using modern forensic techniques. Michelle Parker's file was at the top of her list. In January 2023, Santos contacted the Nebraska State Police Forensic Laboratory. That hair strand from 1979, still sealed in its evidence envelope, could it be tested using modern methods? By September 2023, the lab had extracted a full DNA profile using techniques designed for degraded samples. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. No match. But in December 2023, they tried a different approach: forensic genetic genealogy. The same technique that had solved dozens of cold cases by uploading DNA to public ancestry databases and building family trees to identify suspects. Within weeks, the genealogy search connected to a family line. The trail led to a name that made Santos's hands shake as she read the lab report: Robert Eugene Davis, born 1956, Hartwell, Nebraska. His second cousin had uploaded their DNA to the genealogy database years earlier, never knowing they'd just identified a killer. On February 2nd, 2024, Santos sat in her office staring at the report, unable to process what she was reading. Coach Davis, the man who'd searched for Michelle, who'd led her memorial services, who'd spent 37 years being the person Hartwell trusted with its children. They couldn't arrest him on genealogy DNA alone. They needed a direct sample to confirm the match. For 3 weeks, investigators tracked Davis's movements, waiting. On February 28th, he stopped at a coffee shop, threw away a paper cup. The cup was retrieved, DNA extracted, tested. Perfect match to the hair on Michelle Parker's jeans 45 years earlier. On March 5th, 2024, Sheriff Santos met with the Holt County prosecutor. The evidence was solid. DNA match, opportunity, presence at the fair. They would charge Robert Eugene Davis with first-degree murder. The arrest was scheduled for March 12th. Santos insisted on being there personally. She wanted to look Robert Davis in the eye when justice finally came for him. As the sun rose over Hartwell that Tuesday morning, 4 officers drove to County Road 14, and when Robert Eugene Davis opened his door with a coffee mug in his hand, still believing his secret was safe, 45 years of hiding in plain sight ended with the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The neighbors who gathered watched in shock as Coach Davis was led to the patrol car. Some wept. Others called out questions. Nancy Kowalski's husband rushed outside and grabbed her arm. "That's impossible," he kept saying. "That's Coach Davis. He taught our son. He helped organize the food drive last Christmas. That can't be right." But it was right. And somewhere in the crowd, if Carol Parker had still been alive to see it, she would have recognized the moment she'd waited for across 4 decades of grief and hope that refused to die. Justice had finally come home to Hartwell. The patrol car pulled into Holt County Sheriff's Department at 7:14 a.m. Robert Eugene Davis slumped in the back seat, still wearing his bathrobe, hands cuffed behind him. The parking lot filled rapidly with additional vehicles, as off-duty officers arrived to witness what none of them thought they'd see in their lifetimes. Coach Davis, the man who'd coached their kids, who'd organized charity runs and scholarship funds, being processed for murder. Sheriff Jennifer Santos stood in the booking area, arms crossed, watching as Davis was led inside. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times since the DNA results came back, but the reality felt surreal. Davis wouldn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, shoulders hunched, the confident posture that had fooled a town for 45 years, completely gone. "Remove the cuffs," Santos said as they entered the interrogation room. "Get him some water." The room was deliberately sterile. Gray concrete walls, metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner recording everything. Santos had Davis sit, then left him alone for exactly 43 minutes, watching through the one-way glass as he stared at his cuffed hands. His lips moved constantly, silent words that might have been prayers or rehearsals of lies he'd tell. But when Santos finally entered and placed Michelle Parker's 1979 school portrait on the table between them, something inside Robert Davis shattered like glass. His hand started trembling violently. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's frigid temperature. Santos said nothing, just sat across from him, waiting. "I never meant," Davis whispered, voice cracking. His eyes locked on Michelle's photograph, that smile he'd looked at for 45 years on memorial flyers and scholarship fund posters. "God forgive me, I never meant for it to happen." Santos leaned forward. "Then tell me what did happen, Robert. Tell me about August 18th, 1979. The confession came in fragments, between sobs that shook Davis's entire body. He admitted being at the fairgrounds that night. Admitted watching Michelle from across the livestock barns, working up courage to approach her. She'd been polite when he offered to drive her home. Santos said it wasn't safe for a young girl walking alone in the dark. "She trusted me," Davis said, his voice barely audible. "She got in my truck. She thanked me. Said her dad would appreciate someone looking out for her." Santos's jaw tightened, but her voice remained professional. "What happened then?" Davis's hands weren't just trembling now. They were clawing at the metal table, fingernails scraping against steel. "I pulled off onto that dirt access road, told her I wanted to talk to her. I'd noticed her at school. Thought she was special. She tried to leave the truck. Started saying she'd tell her father. that what I was doing was wrong. The interrogation room suddenly felt colder. Santos knew what was coming, but she needed to hear him say it. I panicked, Davis continued, his breath coming in gasps. There was a tire iron behind the seat. When she turned to run, I grabbed it. I only hit her once, just once. But she fell so fast, and there was blood on the road, on my hands, and I couldn't think. "Where did you take her?" Santos asked, her voice steel wrapped in ice. Davis's face crumpled. Tears and mucus streamed down his cheeks. "The woods, near the Elkhorn River. I buried her where my dad used to take me hunting. I thought if I covered her deep enough, if I prayed hard enough, maybe somehow it would all be undone." Santos pulled out the DNA results, the genealogy reports, the coffee cup evidence, laid them on the table one by one like cards in a game Davis had already lost. "You threw her jacket out the window to create confusion. You joined the search parties. You organized her memorial service. You hugged her mother and told her you'd never forget Michelle." Davis's composure disintegrated completely. He vomited into the trash can beside his chair, then collapsed forward, forehead hitting the table. "I see her face every night," he gasped between sobs. "Every single night for 45 years. I thought if I did enough good things, maybe she'd forgive me. Maybe God would forgive me." Santos leaned forward until her face was inches from his. "She was 16 years old, Robert. She's not forgiving anyone. She's dead. And you spent 45 years pretending to honor her memory, while knowing exactly where you'd buried her body." The sound Davis made wasn't quite human, a wail that started deep in his chest and erupted through clenched teeth. Officers outside the interrogation room exchanged glances. They'd heard confessions before, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried 45 years of buried guilt exploding in a single moment. While Davis sat broken in the interrogation room, a tactical team was executing a search warrant at his house on County Road 14. Linda Davis, his wife of 41 years, stood on the lawn in her nightgown, crying and demanding to know what was happening. A family liaison officer tried to explain, but Linda's screams drowned out every word. "There's been a mistake. Robert would never hurt anyone. He coaches children." Inside the house, investigators moved systematically through each room. The living room held photos of Davis's coaching career, championship trophies, newspaper clippings about the scholarship fund he'd established in Michelle's name. The bedroom was neat, ordinary, revealing nothing. But in the basement, behind a false wall in the boiler room, Detective Marcus Sullivan found what they were looking for. A shoebox, worn cardboard, covered in dust, hidden in a space someone had deliberately concealed behind drywall. Sullivan's hands shook as he opened it. Inside, Michelle Parker's red ribbon from the county fair, the one she'd won with her heifer Daisy. Photographs of Michelle at track meets Davis had coached years after her death, images he must have clipped from yearbooks, and a journal, leather-bound, pages yellowed with age. Sullivan opened to the first entry, dated August 19, 1979, one day after Michelle's murder. "I can never undo what I've done. The only way forward is to make sure she's never forgotten. I'll honor her memory every day for the rest of my life. Maybe somehow that will be enough." The entries continued, sporadic but persistent, spanning 45 years. Davis writing about Michelle's parents, about the search parties, about establishing the scholarship fund, about the weight of his secret and his belief that good works might somehow balance the scales of what he'd done. The final entry, dated March 11, 2024, one day before his arrest, read simply, "They're close. I can feel it. Maybe it's time. Maybe 45 years is long enough." Sullivan photographed every page, his throat tight with rage and something like pity for a man who'd tortured himself for decades while choosing to live free rather than confess. When the search team emerged, Linda Davis was sitting in a patrol car, sobbing. An officer had finally told her why her husband was being arrested. Her reaction, witnessed by a neighbor recording on their phone, would go viral within hours. No, not Michelle Parker. Robert searched for her. He loved that girl. You're lying. But when officers carried the shoebox from the house in an evidence bag, Linda saw it through the car window. Saw her husband's handwriting on the journal visible through the plastic. Something in her face changed, shock transforming into a different kind of horror. The realization that the man she'd shared a bed with for 41 years was a stranger she'd never really known. By noon, Hartwell was paralyzed. The news spread faster than any official statement could control. Coach Davis arrested for Michelle Parker's murder. DNA evidence. Full confession. The girl he'd searched for 45 years ago, he'd killed her. At Hartwell High School, current principal Jennifer Walsh, Michelle's best friend from 1979, called an emergency assembly. Students filled the gymnasium, confusion and fear on young faces, trying to process information that shattered their understanding of trust and safety. "Many of you were coached by Robert Davis," Walsh said, her voice amplified through speakers that seemed inadequate for the weight of her words. "Some of your parents were coached by him. For 45 years, he was someone this community trusted. Today we learned that trust was built on a lie that cost Michelle Parker her life." In the audience, Jessica Chen, now 34, began crying. She'd been one of Davis's star runners, had trusted him completely when he gave her rides home after practice, when he'd asked personal questions about her life. Now those memories curdled, every innocent moment recontextualized into something sinister. "He drove me home at least 50 times, Jessica told reporters later, voice shaking. "He'd ask if I felt safe walking alone, if I had anyone inappropriate bothering me. At the time I thought he was being protective. Now I wonder what he was really thinking. Was he reliving what he'd done to Michelle? Was he deciding whether to do it again?" Across town, Thomas Parker, Michelle's 87-year-old father, received the news in his nursing home room. The dementia that clouded his mind cleared briefly, heartbreakingly, as Sheriff Santos sat beside his bed and explained that they'd arrested the man who killed his daughter. "Bob Davis," Thomas whispered, tears streaming into his white beard. "He organized the scholarship fund. He spoke at every memorial. He hugged Carol. He hugged my wife and told her Michelle was with the angels." Santos held the old man's trembling hand. "We have DNA evidence, Mr. Parker. We have his confession. Michelle is coming home, and Robert Davis will die in prison." Thomas closed his eyes, and for a moment Santos thought he'd slipped back into the fog of dementia. But then he spoke, voice stronger than it had been in years. "Carol waited so long. She died without knowing. But at least Michelle can rest now. At least everyone will know she didn't just run away. She was taken. And now people know who took her." The media descended on Hartwell like locusts. By evening, every major network had trucks parked on Main Street. Reporters interviewed anyone willing to talk. capturing the shock, rage, and profound betrayal rippling through the community. Mark Reynolds, whose son Davis had coached to a state championship in 2015, stood in his driveway, shaking his head. He was at my daughter's wedding. He gave a toast about persistence and never giving up on your dreams. And all that time, he'd killed a 16-year-old girl and buried her in the woods. How do you process that? How do you reconcile those two versions of the same person? Nancy Kowalski, Davis's neighbor who'd witnessed the arrest, told CNN, "I've lived next door to him for 12 years. He helped me with my groceries, fixed my fence. We had coffee together. And I never saw anything that suggested he was capable of murder. That's what scares me most, that evil can look so completely normal." At the Methodist church where Davis had served as an usher for 35 years, Pastor David Williams removed Davis's name from the volunteer board. "We are praying for Michelle's family," Williams told reporters, "and we are praying for our community to find healing. But we will not pray for Robert Davis's soul. That is between him and his God. And I suspect that conversation will not go well for him." By midnight, Hartwell felt like a town under siege. Reporters camped outside Davis's house, outside the sheriff's department, outside the cemetery, where Michelle would soon be reburied beside her mother. The story had everything. Small-town trust betrayed. Cold case solved by DNA. A killer hiding in plain sight for 45 years. But for the people who'd actually lived it, who'd known Michelle Parker and believed Robert Davis was honoring her memory, the media attention felt like salt in wounds that had never properly healed. The exhumation of Michelle's remains from the Elkhorn River woods began on March 15th, guided by Davis's confession. Forensic teams worked with quiet reverence, treating the site like the grave it was, but also documenting everything for the trial that would come. The shallow ravine had changed in 45 years. Trees had grown, the forest had shifted, but the bones were still there, scattered by animals, but identifiable. Michelle Parker was finally coming home. Sheriff Santos stood at the edge of the excavation site, watching technicians carefully bag each fragment. She thought about Carol Parker, who died 6 months earlier without knowing justice would finally come. About Thomas Parker, fading in and out of clarity in his nursing home bed. About the town that had mourned Michelle for decades, while the man who killed her coached their children and led prayer groups. "We got him," Santos said quietly to the air, to Michelle, to all the ghosts that cold cases leave behind. It took 45 years, but we got him. Michelle Parker's second funeral was held on March 28, 2024, at the Methodist Church, where her first service had been conducted in 1979. The church overflowed with mourners. 3 generations gathered to finally lay her to rest beside her mother. Thomas Parker attended in a wheelchair, occasionally lucid, occasionally drifting. But when the pastor spoke Michelle's name, Thomas looked up with tears streaming down his weathered face. "She's home," he whispered to no one in particular. "Our girl is finally home, and that bastard is going to rot in prison." The burial took place under gray Nebraska skies. As mourners filed past the grave, many noticed the new headstone. Michelle Ann Parker, 1963-1979. Forever loved. Finally home. Justice served March 12, 2024. Robert Davis's name appeared nowhere on the memorial. He would not be remembered alongside her. He existed now only as the answer to the question that had haunted Hartwell for 45 years. And that answer would spend whatever remained of its life in a cell, stripped of the respect and trust it had weaponized for decades. The trial of Robert Eugene Davis began on November 3, 2024. Despite his confession, the law required its rituals, its opportunity for the community to witness justice being served in public. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, overflow crowds in adjacent rooms watching via closed-circuit television. Judge Margaret Hayes presided with an efficiency that suggested she found the entire proceeding distasteful but necessary. Lead prosecutor Daniel Morrison's opening statement was devastating. The defendant confessed, not under coercion, not in exchange for mercy. He confessed because 45 years of living with what he'd done finally broke him when science caught up with his crime. This trial is about ensuring that justice, though obscenely delayed, is completely served. The evidence presentation was clinical, methodical, overwhelming. DNA expert Dr. Jennifer Walsh explained forensic genetic genealogy in terms anyone could understand. Sheriff Santos testified about the coffee cup collection, the DNA match, Davis's confession. But the most powerful testimony came from Jennifer Walsh, Michelle's best friend, now a 60-year-old woman whose voice shook with 4 decades of suppressed grief. I blamed myself for 45 years for letting Michelle stay at that fair alone. I carried that guilt my entire adult life. And now I learn that Robert Davis, a man I trusted, a man who coached my children, was the one who killed her. How do you process that level of betrayal? When Davis was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, his attorney advised against it. But Davis insisted. He stood, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame, and spoke. I can't explain why I did what I did. I've spent 45 years trying to understand it myself. Michelle was a beautiful person. She didn't deserve what happened. Her family didn't deserve 45 years of not knowing. I thought if I did enough good, if I helped enough kids, maybe somehow I could balance what I'd done. I know that sounds insane, but it's all I have. The courtroom remained silent. No one wanted his apology. No one cared about his tortured justifications. Judge Hayes delivered the sentence on November 7th, her voice carrying moral authority that filled the room. Mr. Davis, you didn't just murder Michelle Parker. You murdered her family's peace. You corrupted every good deed you did by building them on a foundation of lies and blood. The law allows me discretion in sentencing. I'm sentencing you to life in prison without possibility of parole. You will die behind bars, and you will do so knowing your legacy is murder, not the championships you won or the students you coached. When the judge finished, Davis's mask finally shattered completely. He didn't cry, he screamed, a sound that echoed through the courthouse and made even seasoned officers flinch. I tried to make it right. 45 years I tried. Officers physically restrained him as he collapsed, his body racked with sobs that might have been grief or might have been rage at finally being caught. They dragged him from the courtroom still screaming, the sound fading as heavy doors closed behind him. Outside, Sheriff Santos held a brief press conference. Justice for Michelle Parker came 45 years late, but it came. That matters. It matters to her family. It matters to this community. And it should matter to everyone waiting for answers about cold cases. Science is catching up. Truth is emerging. No one gets away with it forever. Robert Eugene Davis died in prison on February 8, 2026, less than 2 years after his conviction. A heart attack took him in his sleep, denying the world the satisfaction of watching him serve decades behind bars, but ensuring he never experienced freedom again. Thomas Parker died 3 weeks later, on March 1, 2026. The nursing home staff said he'd been declining rapidly, but held on just long enough to know that Michelle's killer was dead. At Thomas's funeral, Sheriff Santos spoke briefly. He waited 45 years for justice. He got it. And now he's with Carol and Michelle. That's all he wanted. The Hartwell cold case became a teaching tool in criminal justice programs across the country. It appeared in textbooks and documentaries, transformed from specific tragedy into symbol of hope for families waiting for answers. But for those who'd lived it, who'd known Michelle as a real person rather than a case study, the resolution brought complicated emotions. Justice served. Killer caught. But a girl still dead, a family destroyed, and a community's trust shattered in ways that might never fully heal. On warm August evenings, when humidity hangs heavy and cicadas sing in the darkness, people still gather at Michelle's grave in Hartwell Cemetery. They bring flowers. They tell stories. They remember the girl with auburn hair and freckles who dreamed of being a veterinarian. And they remember that sometimes justice comes so late, it feels like a ghost arriving at its own funeral. But it comes, and that has to be enough. Michelle Ann Parker, forever 16, finally at rest. Robert Eugene Davis, dead in a prison cell. And Hartwell, Nebraska, learning to live with the knowledge that monsters can hide behind smiles for 45 years before science and persistence finally drag them into the light.